When you think of Thailand, what comes to mind? Probably a tourism powerhouse, right? The land of smiles, this amazing developing world success story. But what if I told you that underneath that shiny surface, there's this quiet crisis brewing, one that's putting the nation's success on a collision course with the future of its own young people? And this quote, man, it just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly captures the paradox we're digging into. I mean, what does happen when your country is telling this story of triumph, but it feels completely, totally disconnected from your own life? Okay, so first things first, let's really break down this contradiction. On one side, you've got this gleaming national image, and on the other, the reality for so many young Thais on the ground. For decades, this has been the brand, right? You see the pictures of bustling cities, these gorgeous resorts, this incredibly vibrant culture. The whole world looks at Thailand and sees a winner, a model for growth that's built on tourism and this super flexible, welcoming vibe. But behind that successful image is a completely different story. For so many young people, life just feels stuck. It feels like the country's progress is some movie they're watching from the sidelines, not a story they're actually a part of. And that, right there, is what makes all that success feel so hollow. So to really get why this is happening, we've got to look at the engine driving all that success: tourism. And as you're about to see, it's a bit of a trap. Now, this is a really fascinating distinction here. Think about it. Tourism is an incredibly strong industry, for sure, when it comes to bringing in money. But it's an economy that's fundamentally built on people just passing through. It's not designed for people to build skills, to accumulate wealth, to build status over a lifetime. So you end up with a strong industry, but a weak society. And this is where you see the structural problem. Yeah, tourism creates a ton of jobs, but the wages, they often just flatline. And the skills you learn, well, they're often really hard to transfer to other, better-paying industries. And on top of all that, as we all saw a few years ago, the whole thing is incredibly vulnerable to whatever's happening in the rest of the world. So, what this all boils down to is this. If you're a young person just starting out, that path upward, that staircase to a better salary, a higher position, more security, it's practically invisible. It's so hard to see how the work you're putting in today is going to translate into a better future tomorrow. Okay, so this economic reality, it doesn't just stay in your bank account. It builds into this really intense pressure psychologically. This isn't just about jobs anymore. It's about what this constant contradiction does to your whole mindset. And that leads to the question that is just haunting an entire generation. Everywhere you look, social media, the news, you're being told your country is doing great, it's thriving. So if you're struggling, what are you supposed to think? What conclusion are you supposed to draw? And this single sentence, wow, it just captures that intense psychological split perfectly. This isn't just about the gap between the rich and the poor. It's this deeply personal feeling that, hey, the nation is succeeding, but I am failing. And here's the twist. You'd think all that frustration would boil over into collective anger, right? Maybe protests. But it doesn't. It turns inward. That pressure makes people internalize their struggle as their own personal fault. And that leads to this sense of resignation, this quiet belief that, well, this must be my problem, not a problem with the system. So how exactly does this economic frustration and this psychological pressure turn into people just not getting involved politically? Well, there's actually a pretty clear mechanism at play. Let's just walk through this, step by step. First, the tourism-led economy grows, but it doesn't really help higher-value industries develop. So that path for the middle class to climb up gets smaller and smaller. At the same time, getting into politics, that's seen as pretty risky. And since you can basically get by day to day without speaking out, the easiest path just becomes silence. Over time, that hardens into a protective mindset. Look, if I can't change it, I'm just going to stop thinking about it. And you can totally see the result of this in how people express their frustration. In the past, youth movements used really direct language. They were angry, they had ideal they were fighting for. But today, that energy gets channeled into sarcasm, into memes, into self-deprecating humor online. It's more of a detached commentary from the sidelines than a direct call for change. And this is so important to understand. This silence isn't necessarily a sign of heavy-handed oppression. It's way more subtle than that. It's the final, logical, rational outcome of learning over and over again that speaking out, it just doesn't work. It's an adaptation to a system that feels totally unchangeable. Now, it would be really easy to look at all this and think, okay, that's a story about Thailand. But it's so much bigger than that. What's happening there is actually a huge warning sign for a lot of other countries right now. Because this is not just Thailand's story. Nope. Any country that relies really heavily on its image, on its soft power, on industries like tourism, they should be paying very close attention. This dynamic, where the national success story completely masks individual stagnation, it can happen anywhere. And here's why this crisis is so sneaky, why it's so hard to see. The country isn't collapsing, right? The big economic numbers look stable enough. And because of that, all these very real, very painful problems, the anxiety about your future, the rising cost of education that doesn't seem to pay off, being stuck in a low-wage job, feeling like you have zero political power, all of it gets framed as a personal failure, not a national crisis. It feels like the country is moving forward, but your own personal clock has just stopped. So what's the way out of this? Well, the answer isn't to just throw tourism out the window. Of course not. It's about stopping it from being the only story. A country like Thailand, or any country in this spot, needs to build more pathways for its people, more diverse industries, and critically, a political climate where talking about failure isn't just allowed, but is actually welcomed as part of the conversation. And all of this brings us to our final, really universal question. This isn't just about why young people in Thailand might be losing hope. It's about something way bigger. It's asking, in any country that's supposed to be successful, where's the breaking point? When does that gap between the official national story and your own personal reality get so wide that you just stop believing in the future? It's not a loud collapse. It's a quiet erosion. And honestly, that's what makes it so incredibly dangerous.